Well, hello, everybody. It's Julian Treasure here. You've probably come here because you've seen one of my TED Talks, and very likely the one that's called How to Speak So That People Want to Listen. And I thought it'd be interesting to raise the curtain and let you have a little look behind the scenes on that particular talk, which has been seen by, 50 million people or something now. Unbelievable number of people. I think it's the number 5 TED Talk of all time. So I must have done something right there. And I thought I'd enlist some help in order to pull that apart a little bit and reveal some of the secrets of having a successful TED Talk. So I've asked my friend Neil Gordon to come and accompany me on this one. And Neil, perhaps you'd like to just say hello and introduce yourself to the people watching this.
Yes, of course. And thank you very much for inviting me to do this with you, Julian. It's quite an honor. And yeah, my name is Neil. And essentially, I am a communication and messaging consultant, in that there are a lot of thought leaders, people who have ideas or methodologies that they're looking to get out into the world and help people to solve problems more effectively. And I help them to essentially figure out what their essential message is and then create compelling content around that, such as something like a TED or TEDx talk or a book or a webinar or something like that. And I like to say that, in a sense, my work is basically about persuasion without everyone needing a shower afterwards, persuasion with heart.
Which is a lot of what TED's about, of course. So Neil and I didn't work on this talk together. I met Neil well after giving this talk, so I'm going to be as fascinated as you are by his perspectives on this. But I thought it would be really interesting for the two of us to have a chat, a bit like a director's version of a film. Just chat through. We'll pause the video from time to time, have a chat about what I did and so forth. So without further ado, let me start the video rolling, and you'll hear the familiar TED theme music, which I came to love very much. And if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm looking at myself on the other screen. There's a little bit of fake applause, and then I walk on stage, and I'm just going to stop it before I even say anything, because first impressions are incredibly important. And so thinking about what you're wearing, I mean, TED's not a formal place. You don't necessarily want to walk on with a suit and tie, but I wanted to look smart, professional, and yet, relatively laid back. So that was the thinking behind what I put on for that day. It was hot in there, as you can see. I'm gleaming a bit. They put makeup on, but it was a very hot theatre with a lot of lights. The TED audience is pretty intimidating. You walk out and, oh, there's Jeff Bezos, and oh, there's Sergey Brin, and there's Bill Gates. It's that kind of an audience. So it is quite a scary thing. And I'm lucky enough to have done this 4 times before this one. So by now I was feeling pretty comfortable with the red dot that you walk to and stand on, the countdown timer, which tells you how long you've got to go and you better not be over time, and the whole paraphernalia, the massive amount of tech backstage, the whole thing. It's quite daunting, but you can get used to anything. So the only other thing I wanted to say before I open my mouth is that I train people with a little acronym when you walk on stage or to the front of a room, which is BESS. Breathe, big deep breath. Your voice is just breath, and it helps to calm any nerves. If your voice goes a bit like that, big deep breath will help it. Expand your awareness, see the whole room. Take your stance. I always visualize a string attached to the top of my head and everything hanging from that, which makes you nice and vertical and relaxed, not stiff and terrified looking. And then smile is the last one, which you can see I'm doing just before I say anything. So Neil, I don't know if you've got anything you want to contribute about the very first impression that you make on people.
My focus, Julian, is of course on content, whereas you bring a lot of different things to the table, especially around breath and the way, as we'll see in the talk itself, actually, the way we can ultimately affect the way we speak and whatnot. My most significant insight around the very beginning of a talk has to do more with what is said at the very beginning. What I find a lot of speakers do is that they get out on stage and they say, oh, thank you so much for being here, and it's so nice. But there's something sacred about a stage and a live audience, something we unfortunately don't really have almost any of during the pandemic. And with having been introduced with all of the other context that's created, what I encourage people to do is exactly what you do here, Julian. You get up, and as we'll see in a moment, you don't visit with the audience and have this, "aw shucks, I hope you like me" kind of energy. You completely own the very first words that you say. And that has a really big impact on how people receive the rest of the talk.
It was a 4-word opening, and it's got a similar cadence to the openings of a lot of great speeches. If you think of "I have a dream," da 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 da. Mm-hmm. And as you'll hear, well, let's just start that and hear what I say.
The human voice.
There you are, da 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 da. The human voice. 3 words. And immediately people are thinking, what about the human voice? So it's an intrigue. You can do it. I think you can start to talk with posing a question, shocking people. You're all idiots. I mean, that would make people sit up, wouldn't it? Or anything like that. And then you explain, "I'm telling you this because," and so the elucidation. But certainly, I agree with you so much, Neil. The coming on stage and going, "Hello, everybody. How nice to be here." That is disengaging. They've seen it all before. Oh dear, another one. Whereas if you walk on stage and do something dramatic and impactful, people remember it and they immediately sit forward and go, "Oh, hello, this is going to be interesting."
Yeah. And then one other thing, though, is that there's a big conversation around how one transfers what they do on stage with what they're doing virtually these days, because everything is virtual now. And I also want to make sure I'm clear that I soften a lot about the visiting and the being a person and the even the "aw shucks" kind of quality that I even brought when you introduced me into this. I wasn't super, we're doing virtual content now. And so different rules, or not even rules. I actually like to say the only hard and fast rule of communication is that there are no hard and fast rules. But different best practices tend to show up in virtual content. We are talking about a live talk, or at least I am when I'm talking about those first critical words.
Definitely. But I think even if I'm doing a webinar, if it's for more than a small group and there isn't relationship being formed, so you're having to imagine, 100 or 700 or 1,000 people out there, I would probably treat it pretty much in the same way. And I would seek to start it with something that's really going to make them sit up and pay attention, because you never know what they could all be doing their email or, thinking about what they're going to have for lunch or whatever it is. And this is one more step removed, the virtual medium. So, okay. Well,
you'll be saying something in the very early part of your talk, actually, that I'll want to relate both to what we say on live stages and what we say virtually as well.
Oh, great. Well, let's see what I'm going to say next.
Yeah.
It's the instrument we all play. It's the most powerful sound in the world, probably. It's the only one that can start a war or say, "I love you." And yet many people have the experience that when they speak, people don't listen to them.
Right, that's the problem, isn't it? When they speak, people don't listen to them. Is that you? I mean, not you.
Right.
But I'm
right, exactly.
In the audience.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really important point to make here, Julian, both in live presentations and virtual presentations alike. The people are most likely to embrace a solution when it's provided within the context of a problem they care about solving. And so what you've done here, you're basically presenting it. You're going to actually ask a question about that any moment now, where people are presented with a thing that they could relate to and they're invested in. And when people are thinking about a problem that they want to solve, they're going to be far more invested in hearing you out. They're not going to tune you out on the phone and stay on their phones and whatnot, or anything like that. They're going to want to stay with you because they really want to solve that problem themselves.
Absolutely. It's kind of the Simon Sinek approach, the why. If you give people the why at the beginning of a talk, then they're with you as you go through the what and the how and move between the levels. So let's see what I go on to say next.
Yeah.
Why is that? How can we speak powerfully to make change in the world? What I'd like to suggest, there are a number of habits that we need to move away from. I've assembled for your pleasure here 7 deadly sins of speaking.
That's a list coming up, flagged as a list. And I don't know about you, but I feel comfortable with lists because I know I can sit back and go, okay, I know what's going to happen now. He's going to give us a list of 7 things. And it helps me to have a little mental structure. So I'm quite fond of lists and acronyms for that reason.
Yeah, I know that you are. First of all, this particular talk is a great example of your affinity for them and other conversations we've had and looking at your book and whatnot. There is an ongoing theme in all of that. And what's interesting, Julian, is that we have it's funny, I'm going to have to eat a little bit of humble pie right now. And this is going to be kind of a vulnerable thing. And because the way that I typically go about helping people, speakers like yourself and thought leaders like yourself, is to actually, with a shorter amount of content, I would, let's say if it was back in like 2013 and you're planning this talk and you're putting it together, I would probably advise you to steer away from lists as the fleshing out of the entire talk, because I like to help people to land a big idea. And if you only have a short amount of time, let's do that. And I would have stood there and said, I recommend you do less of the lists and more of the big idea instead, and just steer toward that. And with all of these tens of millions of views, there's a clear resonance with this approach. So it becomes, again, I said a few moments ago, the only hard and fast rule of communication is that there are no hard and fast rules. Someone like me can show up as like an expert kind of thing and have one way of doing things, and yet a completely opposite way could not only be as effective, but be wildly much more so.
Indeed. Well, I'm a big opponent of bullet points and words on slides, certainly. And I think overstructuring a talk in that way can be very dry and not very engaging. But what I was trying to do with this particular list was to give people a lot of hooks that they could link themselves to. You know, we all have a lot of these tendencies. So I was hoping that as I go through the 7 deadly sins of speaking, that people would be going, oh, that's me. I do that.
Yeah.
And so a list in that way, this is very brief. You know, I have an online course that's 7 hours long about this. So 12 minutes is only enough time really to paint the merest outline of this. But the idea was to be engaging on this. And I was trying to cover in the talk 2 things. One is the deadly sins, which culminate in the 4 foundations. And then the second thing is the vocal toolbox. Actually, when I pitched this talk to TED, I wanted to go on and do a little masterclass in public speaking, and I wanted to make it 18 minutes long. And they were going, whoa, that is too much content for one TED talk. You've got about 3 TED talks there.
18 minutes. Whew.
Yeah. So, I do tend to, I know it's a failing of mine. I do tend to put a lot of content in. When I do a keynote, for 40 minutes, people are exhausted at the end of it because I've been going bang, 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 all the way through. And I could probably cut it down to 20% of the content and labor points for much longer. But I tend to like to respect my audience and expect that they can keep with me and that they'll be engaged. If exhausted at the end, they'll be going, my goodness, that was a lot of very interesting stuff. So maybe that's something I need to rein back on. But I think it worked in this talk because it didn't go too far. So let's start the 7 deadly sins.
I'm not pretending this is an exhaustive list, but these 7, I think, are pretty large. Habits that we can all fall into. First, gossip. Speaking ill of somebody who's not present. Not a nice habit, and we know perfectly well the person gossiping 5 minutes later will be gossiping about us.
Just a word on slides. I love working with slides. I've been doing it for years and years and years. I respect enormously people who can come onto a TED stage with no aids whatsoever. I remember seeing Alain de Botton's first TED talk in Oxford, and it was blinding. Brilliant, brilliant talk. And Neil Stevenson, people who can walk on, be passionate and amazing without any aids.
Yeah.
That's not me. I like to know where I'm going. So I have presenter view on the screen in front of me. I know what's coming up next. So I'm not going to forget where I am, which is most people's terror of being on a stage and talking. However, I do not want to use bullets or distract people's attention away from me, because I'm having a relationship with them. So I use simple pictures. It's very much the Gar Reynolds presentation Zen approach that I adopt. I love his book, and I think it's an excellent guide to anybody who ever uses slides. Don't do bullets. People get very bored with those.
Yeah, I'll offer this because I am less anti-bullet than you are. And what's interesting is that I find that it's ultimately not the use of bullets or even just text in general that I find to be problematic. It's more that I see a lot of speakers putting all of their bullets up on the screen all at once. And so if you are going to use bullets or you find that that winds up being a useful tool, what I recommend is to actually animate a very small amount of the content on the slide at a time. So that, like what you just said, Julian, is that you want to develop a relationship with the audience. And so if people are looking at a slide full of content of all sorts of text and stuff, what they're doing in that moment is they are unsure of whether they should be reading what's on the slide or listening to the speaker. And there's this back and forth. And the friction that comes from that lack of a clear decision winds up becoming anathema to the entire flow, the relationship that you just mentioned.
So true. And of course, the worst thing that can happen after that is the speaker turns around and starts reading the slides, which is, I've seen that so many times, where the speaker's got the back to the audience and they're effectively a member of the audience who happens to be standing on stage reading the same stuff that everybody else is, which is just rude, actually. I did a TED Talk some years after this with John Ronson, which I still love, called The Psychopath Test. He'd written a book about that. And I did some sound, and my friend Evan Grant did some amazing visuals. And so it was a kind of animated, multi-dimensional storytelling event. And I think there, everything worked in sync. So people knew exactly what to do. They were looking at John throughout the whole thing, but the rest of it was giving ambience and tremendous spooky feeling to the thing. So I think you're so right. If you start making the screen the star of the show, then that's a big mistake. And so the images I'm using here, like this one for Gossip, they're just they're standard images from, I think I used I can't remember who it was, Shutterstock or somebody like that, or whoever it was. And they're just there to give a depth to what I'm saying. So you glance at it, you come back to me. It doesn't take long to take in a picture like that. So let's carry on from Gossip.
Second, judging. We know people who are like this in conversation, and it's very hard to listen to somebody if you know that you're being judged and found wanting at the same time. Third, negativity. You can fall into this. My mother, in the last years of her life, became very, very negative, and it's hard to listen. I remember one day I said to her, "It's October the 1st today," and she said, "I know, isn't it dreadful?"
Okay, I want to pause that myself because I very much like this example of your mother, and she said, "It's October 1st today," and she said, "I know, isn't it dreadful?" And I want to highlight this story, Julian, because people often make a really big deal out of learning how to tell a story. And what you demonstrate here is a very simple but very important and powerful ingredient to effective storytelling. And it's so powerful that you could get a reaction from the audience in just a couple of lines. And that is that when we're telling true stories about our life, the value of that story will ultimately be defined by how well we incorporate the unexpected, as in a thing that we didn't see coming. And it could be a good thing, and that defines a story in a certain way because, oh, wow, that was amazing. Or something horrible that happens that sets us on a whole new path or forces us to, because what the unexpected does is it forces us to adapt.
Absolutely.
And within that is a lesson.
Totally.
So you said, "It's October 1st today," and she said, "I know, isn't it dreadful?" And that opposite reaction to what we would think is like a small talk kind of comment is an unexpected moment. And so you get a reaction, and it's just great. It's a great mini course on effective storytelling because it just happens in a couple of lines.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of stories. And of course, you can make them up. You can tell, myths, and you can make stories up which have got some sort of embedded point to them. But I do think I agree with you that stories taken from our own life, and this is a true story that absolutely happened exactly like that. And it is funny, but it's also sad. So it has a sort of bittersweet element to it. That, you know, the audience laughed, but you can feel that they're empathizing as well. So I agree with you. I think it's very powerful. I mean, just think of Ken Robinson's wonderful story about the little girl in class. It's so sad to lose Ken, but you know, what a great story. And his whole talk was encapsulated in that 20-second story, actually. So let's move on.
It's hard to listen when somebody's that negative. And another form of negativity, complaining. Well, this is the national art of the UK. It's our national sport. We complain about the weather, about sport, about politics, about everything. But actually complaining is viral misery. It's not spreading sunshine and lightness in the world. Excuses. We've all met this guy. Maybe we've all been this guy. Some people have a blame thrower. They just pass it on to everybody else and don't take responsibility
just
for their
a word
actions.
On,
and again, hard to listen to somebody who's being
stance
like
and
that.
gesture, because there was a long shot of me standing there. I'm very clear when I'm on stage that I don't move my feet. Hardly ever at all. Now, you know, I've got nothing against pacers. Have you ever seen Tony Robbins on stage? He's like a lion, you know, pacing up and down, and he has this energy the whole time. Well, that's fine. That's him. I like to be a lot more rooted. So the other visualization I've got is roots coming out of my feet and into the ground. I find it very distracting when people do the little walk of death round and round on the spot, or lean from one side and then go over to the other side. Or the most classic one is people walking a few paces to the right and then a few paces to the left and then a few paces to the right. And by the time they've done it about 6 or 7 times, people are going, why are they doing that? Are they going to, oh yeah, there they go again. It's just distracting. So I think a lot of being powerful on stage is minimizing distractions and being intentional. The gestures I'm using there are completely intentional. You know, I think being conscious is a big part of being effective when you're in front of a bunch of people. So no tics, and that takes practice. That's something I talk about a lot in my course, practice.
Of course. I like to say that, I like to ask the question, does your talk ultimately pass the fast forward test? As in, if you press fast forward on your talk, would you just be suddenly this frenetic thing of moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? Or would it be kind of similar to what it would look like if you were doing it at regular speed kind of thing?
Yeah.
And so if, like, to your point, if you're constantly pacing, if it's just this expenditure of nervous energy, then that's going to become, I experience that as numbing out the speaker myself, because it just becomes too much. It becomes a physical monotony in a way. Yeah,
definitely. I think meaninglessness is what to avoid. If it's meaningful, you know, pacing around, if you're anchoring locations in the stage, here's my storytelling spot, or here's my you know, shocking spot, whatever it might be, then it's absolutely fine to move. And if you are like that in life, be authentic, as I say a bit later, but not meaningless. So we go on.
Penultimate, the 6th of the 7, embroidery, exaggeration. It demeans our language, actually, sometimes. For example, if I see something that really is awesome, what do I call it?
So there's a gesture that I train on that I've just used there. You'll see that I was speaking with my hands like this. And then when I ask a question, it's that, which is called the placator gesture. It's an absolutely archetypal gesture. It means please, or what do you think? I have no weapons. I'm not going to hurt you. It's a very passive and submissive gesture, that one. I've seen people deliver entire talks with that gesture. And, you know, if you watch politicians, most of them will have their thumbs vertical. So they'll be waving their hands like this, but not open like this, because it's a begging gesture. So gestures can be very powerful. We'll move on.
And then, of course, this exaggeration becomes lying, out and out lying, and we don't want to listen to people we know are lying to us. And finally, dogmatism. The confusion of facts with opinions.
Again,
when those two things get
an intentional gesture,
you're listening
two
into
things,
the wind.
You can visualize them.
Bombarding you with their opinions as if they were true. It's difficult to listen to that. So here they are, 7 deadly sins of speaking. These are things I think we need to avoid. But is there a positive way to think about this? Yes, there is.
So I very much want to make note, Julian, of how, because we will see two more constructs from you in the remainder of the talk here. And the first one with the deadly sins, to me, is very significant because what you're providing first is the false solutions, the things that we're doing that are problematic in nature, the way things are typically and often done, and that which we want to depart from when we are setting out to better ourselves and to improve, which is, of course, at the heart of so many talks and speeches and whatnot that people might give. So I want to very much commend that you focused on the false typical solutions that people typically have in their communication before moving on to the things you wish to do. And that's something that we can encourage people to do in general, is to talk about the things that aren't working before then moving on to the things that do.
I often visualize a funnel when I'm creating content, where you deal with a lot of the bad stuff and the negative stuff or the problems or the mistakes first, and then you funnel down to, or this is the way I often do it. It's not the only structure, but it tends to be one that I use quite a lot. And that certainly was what I was doing here, because it goes through the 7 deadly sins. And then when we started again, we'll go straight into, okay, so what do you do about it? What do you do right? How do you do it better? Right. And that's the 4 foundations. So let's go on to that.
I'd like to suggest that there are 4 really powerful cornerstones, foundations, that we can stand on if we want our speech to be powerful and to make change in the world. Fortunately, these things spell a word. The word is hail, and it has a great definition as well. I'm not talking about the stuff that falls from the sky and hits you on the head. I'm talking about this definition, to greet or acclaim enthusiastically, which is, I think, how our words will be received if we stand on these 4 things. So what do they stand for? See if you can guess.
So just a little teaser question. I mean, it's always quite nice to engage people. What do you think? What do you think's coming up next? To engage curiosity, I suppose, which is really the lifeblood of a good talk. If you can keep people curious about what's coming next, then they're awake, they're with you, they're paying attention, as opposed to it all being very predictable.
Yeah, I would like to eradicate what many speakers call learning objectives at the beginning of their talks. Like you might give a keynote or a breakout session at a conference. I once spoke at a conference where I was required to have learning objectives. And what I feel that does is it deflates all of the engagement, because people know exactly what they're going to learn. Yeah. Which smooths all the edges out. It doesn't keep them on the edge of their seats. And you might think, oh, it's a breakout session at a conference for insurance or something like that. And it's like, people are people no matter what. And so if you're able to arouse curiosity, just like you said, Julian, you can get people hooked in. And so when I did actually do the learning objective slide, I still didn't explain what it was they were going to learn. It's like, there's going to be a technique that we're going to learn that's going to be a game changer. And and it's just so I technically had the slide, it was one of the bullet points, but I didn't tell them what it was because I still wanted them to be anticipating it.
I so agree. It's like telling people the plot of the film before you see it. You know, it takes away all the magic, really. So
Avengers Endgame was like the highest grossing thing of all time. If we knew how it was going to end by the end of the first half of that 2-parter, it wouldn't have gotten nearly as much of a box office draw.
Totally. Yes, I agree with you completely. So let's carry on with
the H, honesty.
The list here.
Being true in what you say, being straight and clear. The A is authenticity, just being yourself. A friend of mine described it as standing in your own truth, which I think is a lovely way to put it. The I is integrity, being your word, actually doing what you say, and being somebody people can trust. And the L is love. I don't mean romantic love, but I do mean wishing people well. For 2 reasons. First of all, I think absolute honesty may not be what we want. I mean, my goodness, you look ugly this morning. Perhaps that's not necessary. Tempered with love, of course, honesty is a great thing. But also, if you're really wishing somebody well, it's very hard to judge them at the same time.
So a couple of things there. Just a word on pace. I've seen a lot of people who, when they get nervous on stage, they speak very quickly and they think it's essential to fill every second with words. Right. And I don't do that a lot. I mean, I can speed up when I need to, but when I was going through that, there were a lot of little pauses to make emphasis. And actually, you know, when I'm training people and doing this on stage, you can pause for the longest time and people will stay with you, you know, 20 seconds. People will just be sitting there going, oh, it's nice and peaceful now, isn't it? You know, that's fine. They're with you. They don't get angry or impatient. So I think that kind of sense of taking your time, it's only a 12-minute talk. A lot of people would be going really, really quickly to get so much stuff in. But I had learned by this stage that in 12 minutes, it's really important to treat it as its own kind of land that you can map out and you can take your time exploring and, you know, really relish it.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting how I find that there's a somewhat wide range of pacing. Like some people will speak about 150 words per minute on stage, whereas some on the high end might be 170, on the low end it might be 130. And then you have, like you mentioned, Mr. Tony Robbins, whose TED Talk I timed, and he's up to like 220 or 230 words per minute or something like that. And whatever it is, however fast it is overall, to your point, there's always room for a little bit of a pause or a little bit, at the very least, of a breaking up of the rhythm. If you happen to speak really fast, as long as you break it up in a few strategic points, that could be a way that you work around it. If it's difficult for you to slow yourself down overall, you can just find specific places. You ask a question, why is that? Half a beat, pause, and then you can move on. Because the most dynamic speakers are the ones who can invite contrast of some sort or another into their talk.
Yeah, and so I think I did a couple of those bits by intriguing them there. And of course, we're about to come on to the vocal toolbox where I absolutely speak about these things.
I'm not even sure you can do those two things simultaneously. So hail. Also, now that's what you say, and it's like the old song, it is what you say, it's also the way that you say it. You have an amazing toolbox. This instrument is incredible, and yet this is a toolbox that very few people have ever opened. I'd like to have a little rummage in there with you now, and just pull a few tools out that you might like to take away and play with, which will increase the power of your speaking.
So again, that's kind of giving people a metaphor which they can hang their hat on, and which intrigues them. I have a toolbox. I didn't know I had a toolbox. What's in the toolbox? All these questions are being kind of raised with that nice picture. I mean, I do this in a huge amount more detail in the course and in the book and so forth. I only had a few minutes left of this talk, so they're done in very short order. But nevertheless, I think it's fascinating to reveal to people that this is a skill, speaking, and it's an amazing instrument that we use. Most people hadn't thought about it.
Of course. And you also did a very nice thing here in that you had the hail construct right before this toolbox. The hail, while it's also practical in nature, there are larger, more abstract concepts like love that define that particular construct, whereas what we're about to see here is far more practical. There's a lot more mechanical stuff going on, and there's even a demonstration. And so you've done a good job of going from the broader, more conceptual, more theoretical to the mechanical, practical stuff, which is, again, not a hard and fast rule, but generally I recommend people move into the practicum in the later part, because once they're grounded in the concepts, they're more immersed in the kind of things that you can do in a more mechanical sense.
It's back again to the kind of the funnel approach that I always think of. Right. So it's getting easier to understand as we go through. So let's see what's in the toolbox.
Register, for example. Now, falsetto register may not be very useful most of the time, but there's a register in between. I'm not going to get very technical about this for any of you who are voice coaches. You can locate your voice, however. So if I talk up here in my nose, you can hear the difference. If I go down here in my throat, which is where most of us speak from most of the time, but if you want weight, you need to go down here to the chest. You hear the difference? We vote for politicians with lower voices.
So again, pace came into it there. I was speaking quite quickly and then I slowed right down. And doing that demonstration physically, I think, is quite powerful to understand the difference between nose voice and throat voice and then chest voice when you really do resonate in your chest, and you get that depth. So I think that was quite effective. We're getting into very practical stuff here.
Yeah. And you're also doing a very good thing here, which I want everyone to notice, is that you're in the demonstration, you're doing what I interpret to be a bit of theatricality, in that you're reenacting the way things happen. There are actually very few TED speakers I've seen over the years who break up the simple act of speaking with some sort of recreation. I believe there's a speaker, her name is Kelly McGonigal, I believe her name is, and she gives a talk on making stress your friend. And she does this reenactment of people in the study, looking at you with disdain and stuff, like, ugh, kind of thing. And we don't really see very much of that. It's usually very intellectual, conceptual kind of speaking, as opposed to I'm doing this thing right now. And I'm a former theater major, and my Scottish accent is abysmally wonderful, but I never shy away from an opportunity to just break out like some terrible accent or some kind of thing, because it does break things up quite a lot, and it puts people in the moment right then and there.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's right. So carrying on.
Because we associate depth with power and with authority. That's register. And we have timbre. It's the way your voice feels. Again, the research shows that we prefer voices which are rich, smooth, warm, like hot chocolate. Well, if that's not you, that's not the end of the world, because you can train. Go get a voice coach. And there are amazing things you can do with breathing, with posture, and with exercises to improve the timbre of your voice. Then prosody. I love prosody. This is the sing-song, the meta-language that we use in order to impart meaning. It's route one for meaning in conversation. People who speak all on one note are really quite hard to listen to if they don't have any prosody at all. That's where the word monotonic comes from, or monotonous, monotone. Also, we have repetitive prosody now coming in, where every sentence ends as if it were a question, when it's actually not a question, it's a statement.
So again, enacting stuff, and that obviously hit a chord with a lot of people, because the high rising terminal, or what it was originally called Australian questioning intonation, is very common in the world, unfortunately, and a lot of people come across it a great deal. The other one I talk about these days a lot is a register that I didn't cover in this, which is vocal fry, and where people are talking like this.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's all down in the throat. Yeah, I'm really excited about this.
NPR voice.
Yes, which is unfortunately very, very common now. And again, not a particularly nice thing to listen to, and a sad abuse of this incredible instrument to me. So I think it was quite nice to, again, do a bit of theatricality, I suppose, acting out the thing, and it got a laugh. Let's carry on.
And if you repeat that one over and over, it's actually restricting your ability to communicate through prosody, which I think is a shame. So let's try and break that habit. Pace. I can get very, very excited by saying something really, really quickly, or I can slow right down to emphasize.
And again, doing the stuff, showing it to them really helps. So I think the most important thing about pace and volume and, you know, many of these things is variety when you're speaking, not doing the same thing. I've been in many places where there's a speaker who's got a repetitive cadence. And, you know, if you speak with a repetitive cadence and everything comes out sounding exactly the same, after a while, people start going to sleep because they know how the next line is going to come out. You know, it's like hypnotizing people, and there's no surprise there at all. So I think it's quite nice to demonstrate these things, and people get the sense of how powerful they can be if used intentionally.
Yeah, I encourage people to reflect on how even the classic pop song structure, the A, B, C, B, I believe it is, where you have a bridge, the C is the bridge, because you go back and forth between the chorus and the verse and chorus and verse and whatnot. And the bridge winds up being this way that just completely disrupts that pattern. it doesn't take a whole lot to disrupt the pattern. You don't have to constantly disrupt throughout, because even constantly disrupting winds up becoming its own form of tedium.
Absolutely.
And so there winds up being this really nice balance you get to play with there.
Yes, and I think I've got a bridge coming up in just
And at the end of that,
couple of
is
minutes.
our old friend, silence.
And see how long I pause
Nothing
here
wrong with a bit
for.
of silence. in a
I could have
talk, is
gone
there?
much longer than
We don't have
that.
to fill it with ums and ahs. Can be very powerful. Of course, pitch often goes along with pace to indicate arousal, but you can do it just with pitch. Where did you leave my keys? Where did you leave my keys? It's a slightly different meaning in those two deliveries. And finally, volume. I can get really excited by using volume, sorry about that if I startled anybody, or I can have you really pay attention by getting very quiet. Some people broadcast the whole time, try not to do that. That's called sodcasting. Imposing your sound on people around you carelessly and inconsiderately, not nice. Of course, where this all comes into play most of all is when you've got something really important to do. It might be standing on a stage like this and giving a talk to people. It might be proposing marriage, asking for a raise, a wedding speech, whatever it is. If it's really important, you owe it to yourself to look at this toolbox and the engine that it's going to work on. And no engine works well without being warmed up.
So I'm just moving towards the bridge here, which is a state change, quite a big disruption. And they'd been sitting there. I was the last one on. And I think they'd been sitting there for probably an hour and a half or something in that region. And just by sitting for that long, I mean, there's a reason that plays have intervals and so forth, that, you know, it's important to get up and change your state and get some endorphins moving around you by physical activity. So I really wanted to do that for them. And that was what I was able to do with the vocal warm-up exercises, which a lot of people remembered.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that there's generally an assumption that with a large one-to-many type audience situation, that there's no real room for some kind of actual in real time type exercise or something like that. But one of the most popular, I believe it's a TEDx talk, is with a gentleman named Graham Shaw, and he just does this this drawing tutorial throughout the talk, and it's got tens of millions of views. And it's just such a simple thing that if you keep the exercises simple enough, which of course you do in a moment, we'll see in a moment that you have done, you can actually pull off quite a lot with hundreds and hundreds of people in the room.
Yeah, well, it certainly seemed to work for them. So let's go on and see how the vocal exercises, the warm-ups go.
Warm up your voice. Actually, let me show you how to do that. Would you all like to stand up for a moment? I'm going to show you the 6 vocal warm-up exercises that I do before every talk I ever do. Anytime you're going to talk to anybody important, do these. First, arms up. Deep breath in and sigh out. Like that. One more time. Very good. Now we're going to warm up our lips, and we're going to go bop, 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 bop. Very good. And now, just like when you were a kid. Now your lips should be coming alive. We're going to do the tongue next with exaggerated la, 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 la. Beautiful. You're getting really good at this. And then roll an R. That's like champagne for the tongue.
So as I'm going through this, the pace has picked up. I'm getting much more engaged with them, and the energy level has gone up quite considerably. Just for them standing up, the energy in the room went up. But this is a lot of fun for them, and it's very funny to see some titans of industry out there
Going bop, 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 bop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So I had a lot of fun doing it, and I do this a lot with large groups of people. It works every time. It's a really, really lovely thing to do with people, to wake them up, to state change them, and you can feel the difference afterwards. So we're just coming up to the last, the big one, the siren.
And if I can only do one, the pros call this the siren. It's really good. It starts with wee and goes to or. The wee is high, the or is low. So you go wee, or wee. Fantastic. Give yourselves a round of applause. Take a seat. Thank you. Next time you speak, do those in advance.
The summary is really bring them back to the why. And it all ends up with the word understanding, which is something that most people are very positive about, I guess. So I think there's a great structure I like, which is say. Say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said. It's the old essayists structure, and it's quite powerful because people have short memories. So it's a good thing, even in 12 minutes, to go back and summarize where you've been.
Yeah, and I'd like for everyone to take very clear notice of what, Julian, you're about to say, in that when I was talking earlier about distilling one's concepts down to something more essential, we're coming upon the part of the talk where you actually do that. And we can obviously discuss it explicitly on the other side of it. But one of the things that shows up in just about every one of the most popular talks of all time, like yours, Julian, is not just the information, but the instilled essential idea that ties everything together.
Very well
yeah, absolutely, and that's what we're just coming to here. So let's just finish it off.
And bad acoustics. I have talked about that on this stage in different phases. What would the world be like if we were speaking powerfully to people who are listening consciously in environments which were actually fit for purpose? Or to make that a bit larger, what would the world be like if we were creating sound consciously and consuming sound consciously and designing all our environments consciously for sound? That would be a world that does sound beautiful, and one where understanding would be the norm. And that is an idea worth spreading. Thank you.
So ending with the TED catchphrase, of course, which is a bit cheeky, but I think, after 5 of those, I was able to take it on without being thrown off the stage. And it got a very, very nice response. And the other thing I'd say at the end of a talk like that is a big mistake I see many people doing is rushing off stage. I don't mean you stand there, going, come on, more. But it is nice to stand there and acknowledge the applause, maybe a little bow, look around, smile, thank you very much, and then make your way off stage. I've seen so many people who go, and that's the end of my talk, thanks, bye. And they're gone, which is slightly rude, I think.
Yeah, I imagine it comes from a place of vulnerability, and perhaps if someone's done some work on themselves to the point where they're a little caught up in, they might be afraid of letting their ego get to them or something like that. They might not feel like they're ready to receive that kind of embrace from the audience, but that becomes, in a way, because speaking is such an emotionally significant thing for people to do. And so it winds up being, if that is one's inclination, then I encourage people to really take a look at that, not just in terms of the relationship to their speaking, but the relationship to themselves.
Yes, for sure. I think, not being able to receive is something that many people will feel an affinity for, and it's something to overcome. And I've done that over the years just through practice, I think. So I'm quite happy now to, without milking it, to stand and say thank you very much for your appreciation. So it was an important talk. I think for me, it's transformed my life. It's made a huge difference to me since. I've been all over the world talking to groups as a result of this talk. I hope very much it's made a difference in the world. That's the main thing to me. Because when you stand on stage, it's not about you, is it? It's always about the gift that you're giving. And that's why I was talking about love and wishing people well. And I seriously hope that the 50 million or whoever's seen that it's made a difference in their lives, and that it's actually improving understanding and their ability to communicate.
Do you have any sense that because it's now been, I think this came out in 2014 and we're now recording this in 2020, in the 6 years since, do you have specific moments or interactions or whatnot that stand out to you as a demonstration of the impact of the talk?
Well, I've certainly had a lot of communication from people saying thank you for it. Thank you for the work, from teachers who are trying to teach children how to communicate better, to people who've found it very difficult to express themselves in the past and who found it very useful. So, it is lovely to get that kind of communication emails come in, and people say it's made such a difference to me. So, that makes it all worthwhile, I think. And certainly for me, it was a joy to deliver it. I mean, you could see I really enjoyed that. After doing it 4 times before, I was comfortable enough to have fun. And I had a lot of fun delivering that. And I think I did a good job of delivering the content on that occasion. It's not always as good as that, but I was lucky enough that the cameras were on and they caught it, and they caught the energy in the room, and it's obviously caught a lot of people's imagination. So it's been a wonderful experience, really.
Yeah. It's really a testament to the agility of the format, and that you can, in 10 or so minutes, just show up and say some things that tens of millions of people have valued, and to your point, have actually done something with and have begun to find their own voice in all of this. And I like for everyone to recognize that the value of one's talk isn't based on what we say on stage, but rather what our audience does once we're done saying it. In that way, I'm very pleased that people have found this, as well as your other talks, and have transformed their relationship to sound.
Hope so. Ripples in the pond. Well, Neil, I want to say thank you very much for being with me as we journeyed through that important talk for me and for a lot of people, I guess. And I hope this has been of value to anybody who's got to go out there and talk in public, or do this even. Whenever we get back in front of people, it'll be wonderful to use some of those skills again. So really appreciate it. Neil, would you like to just mention your website so that people can find out more about you?
Oh, that's very kind of you, Julian. Thank you. Yes, you can find me at neilcanhelp.com, neilcanhelp.com.
Great. And I guess you've got mine, because by seeing this, you've already come to my website, so I don't need to say that. And look forward to taking you on any further journeys into sound and speaking and listening. Thanks very much.